Okay.
Welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Brightman and happy to have with us David Anderson once again. We're back in the sandbox talking Rutgers football following about a week and a half after the spring game. It took us a little while to get together, but wanted to kind of wrap up the spring for Rutgers football. And we want to do it in kind of a fun, impromptu fashion. We're going to do fact or fiction. We have not discussed this prior to. We're just going to kind of ramble back and forth, giving each other fact or fiction, and then kind of shoot from the hip from there. So we hope this works out. Could be a disaster. It could be a lot of fun. I guess you could say that about Rutgers football in general. Anyway, David Anderson, let's start with the obvious one. AJ Serace had a really strong spring game. Johnny Shepard entered the transfer portal before the spring game, giving signs that he had a dominant spring and was obviously the number 2. In terms of AJ Serace, fact or fiction, he will have a better career than Ethan Kaliakmanis at Rutgers and will have as good or better season since Gary Nova at some point in his career. Fact or fiction?
So basically the question is AJ Serace will he be the best quarterback Rutgers has had on their roster since 2015, basically? That's right. The question. Because you're basically saying that Ethan has been the best since then and that Serace might have a better career than him. I'm going to go probably, if it's a binary, I'll go fact. I mean, I think that the growth he showed from last year's composure to this year in the spring game was tremendous. I mean, you saw some tools last year. We talked about like the simple reactive throws like checkdowns or quick slants. He was okay on those last year, but he didn't command the offense. He wasn't dangerous as a quarterback. He wasn't a playmaker as a quarterback. And I felt like one of the things that made Ethan, stand out from some of the previous quarterbacks they've had since 2014 is he's the first one that has been a playmaker through his arm. And I do think Serace will bring that to the table, that defenses will have to defend the entire field facing him. So I'm going to say it's not as much of an overreaction as, some of the other ones. What about yourself?
I think, listen, I think Kaliakmanis could have a really good season. But, Serace, in terms of the amount of time he has left and the maturity he's showing, I think, obviously his pedigree and the way he's kind of gotten better year after year after year in his high school career as well. I feel like he's just scratching the surface. His potential is really high. I've had Tony Rasiopi, the quarterback coach, on several times. He's super high on his potential. His IQ is obviously really high, being the son of Bob Serace. So I think his ceiling is super high. I think he's going to end up having even better career than Ethan Kaliakmanis, and I think could have as good as or better season than Gary Nova did back in 2014 at some point in his career.
All right. So let's stay on the same vein. Let's talk about his favorite target during the spring game. One of the ones that kind of very hot take coming out of it was Vernon Allen is a top 3 receiver on this roster right now. Fact or fiction?
Ooh, that is a good one. Let's see. Well, you have Ian Strong. I think, is right up there. I think in terms of who else you're talking about, let's see. Vernon Allen. I mean, obviously he was very impressive in the spring game. I think that his ability, also the chemistry he had with Serace too, I thought was really impressive. He showed playmaking ability. I think there's the wide receiver group. There's a lot of talent. I think there's question marks on who could actually emerge long term. In terms of this season coming forward, I think it's certainly possible. In terms of fact or fiction, I'm gonna say, let's see. I'm gonna say This is tough. This is showing that we're right on the spot here.
Exactly. It is a tough one.
Yeah, and we're, in terms of transfers too, obviously DT Sheffield did not play in the spring game. A lot of people have high hopes for him in terms of the impact he can make. Shiraka has talked about him in the spring being a little bit different than Demir Miller, so we really don't know what to expect from him other than he does have blazing speed, could really be a playmaker. And then just in terms of who else could emerge, Allen certainly showed a leg up, I think, after the spring game. So I think, could he emerge as a starter? Yes. So if that's the case, I say fact. He could be a top 3 receiver on this roster.
Okay. I'm going to say fiction. I think that he benefited from the injury to Fama Toure, who had received a spring award prior to going down due to injury. Obviously, the staff's always been high on Fama. He's a very athletic guy, obviously, just like his brother. And I'm going to have to say I agree with you. I think Ian Strong definitely is the best receiver on the team right now. But then after that, it's like, is Sheffield a role player? Is KJ Duff going to take the next step? I don't know. I mean, my thing with Allen, why I was even giving this the time of day as a hot take, is because one of the things that we don't see enough and haven't seen enough is just easy yards on quick slants, right? It seems like teams just get those, and Rutgers has just not been able to do so. Now, part of that's your line, part of that's on your quarterback, and part of that's on the receiver. So it's not as simple as it sounds. But how many times did AJ Suresh just like drop back, runs a slant, throws a perfect timing, boom. And then even you either move the chains if it's like second and medium, or if it's 1st and 10, you're setting up a second and short. Like Rutgers needs those yards. They haven't had those yards. And so I'm going to say fiction, but could it be possible? Is it possible that he's one of the 3 most effective receivers if they were to play a game right now? Maybe. But overall, is he a top 3 overall well-rounded receiver? I'm going to say no.
Right. But if he fills that slot role, he could end up being top 3 in production.
True. Right.
Okay. Yeah, that's a fun one. Also, we didn't mention Ben Black, still high hopes for him as well. So I think that there's a lot to be excited about with the wide receiving room, but some unpredictability there too.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Houston, people were hyping him up even before the game. He played fine. I mean, he was good, but he just was overshadowed by his freshman classmate. But like you said, yeah, Ben Black had that nice play down the sideline, which I also believe was from Suresh. So
it was.
If Ben Black can be more than he was last year, they're going to have to get him some snaps. So, all right, what do you got for me?
All right, offensive line. There's enough depth there that they will be okay without Holland Pierce, among others.
I mean, I'm as bullish on the offensive line as anybody, but I'm gonna say they'll be worse than last year, which I guess in the case of binary will be fiction, I guess, if we're saying pure fact or fiction. But here's my rationale for it. Sometimes if you have a really, really elite quarterback, you can get by with 5 guys on the line who have really good chemistry. Nobody's really, really good, but nobody's really, really bad. And you're kind of like pretty good across the board. But most of the time, you need at least 2 guys who are above average in pass protection and at least 2 guys who are above average run blockers for their position. And when I look at this offensive line, again, I think Tyler Needham could play left tackle, but I don't see him as an above average left tackle in either of those phases. So now we're talking about, okay, in pass protection, who is above average at their spot? And maybe Gus Zielinskis, though he did struggle against like really big guys when they put a guy head up on him. And now that the film's out there after last year, I expect teams might do that more. So I'm not sure. And then in the run game, a healthy Brian Felter is probably above average, and maybe Kobe Asamoah. But what Holland Pierce gave you was he gave you above average play in both phases. Mm-hmm. And to see, again, it doesn't have to be the same guy. Like, it doesn't have to be Tyler Needham needs to be Holland Pierce. I'm not saying that. But I'm just not sure who is going to be better than average for a Big Ten lineman at their spot. What about you? What do you think?
I totally agree. I think they're in a better position in terms of years past. I don't think they're going to fall apart or anything like that. I think there's enough depth there to kind of mix and match. They also added Ryder Langsdale from Lafayette on this day. So, they're adding more quality depth, I think. But yeah, I agree. I don't think they're going to be as good as last year. I don't think they're going to be bottom 3 in the league either. So I
Right.
think it's, also going to be up to Shiraka to kind of thread that needle in terms of how to effectively, work around their lack of or their weaknesses, but also be able to maximize their strengths because it is going to be different. And I think obviously health is unpredictable, but that is a major key here. But you have more offensive weapons. So, to your
Right.
point about the short pass game, especially, we didn't even talk about running back. If Rutgers is able to have a little bit more of a pass game in the short field, that could benefit an offensive line as well, kind of take away some of the wear and tear, also take some pressure off of them. So I agree. I think in terms of fine, are they going to be at the same level they were with Alan Pierce last year? No, but I don't think there's a panic time either.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Rutgers. So just for those recording, Rutgers just since the spring game, basically in the last couple of days, they've now added 5 transfers, 3 of which have been on the offensive line: Mashud Giwa, Zach Amland, and Ryder Langsdale. So clearly, the staff knows that this is maybe. I don't expect any of those guys going to come in and start this year, but they clearly are acknowledging, hey, we got to try to beef up the depth if we can on that spot. All right, here's probably the second blazing hot take, but it's very negative, unfortunately. Eric O'Neill, it would not be in a Big Ten 2 deep for the majority of the conference.
Fact. We were both, I think, pretty equally skeptical of the acquisition. It's not to say that he won't have his moments. I think, he obviously at JMU, showed some real signs as being a disruptor, but I think it's just a whole nother level in the Big Ten from a size perspective. I think he's a little bit undersized for an edge rusher in the Big Ten. I think he, lacks explosiveness at times. I think, he could be an effective player in certain situations, but I think the assessment that, I think what's going to happen is people are going to appreciate what Aaron Lewis was that much more. Talk about as maligned of a player in terms of a good player that Rutgers has had, in terms of the criticism he took from his own fan base over the years. And granted, listen, he wasn't the player we had all hoped to be. It kind of reminds me of Darius Hamilton to a degree, someone that came in, with a lot of expectations. Maybe wasn't the superstar everyone hoped they would be, but still a very good football player. And I think also what a lot of people, I think, maybe are undervaluing is the attention that he drew on the defensive line and that offensive coordinators had to worry about. And I think to O'Neill, he's got a big shoes to step into. And I think that he's going to be a 3-down edge rusher lineman in passing and rushing situations, I just personally don't see it. I think that in terms of him potentially wearing down against some of those big tackles in the Big Ten, I think it's very possible. Again, I think how they utilize him, keeping him fresh, keeping him, in certain situations, that can help his effectiveness. But in terms of being, top half of the league edge rusher in the Big Ten, I say fiction.
I'll agree with you, and I'll highlight one play that summed it up for me. So Carter K-Dow, right? Backup lineman. No one would tell you he's on the 2 deep, even though he played pretty well. And it's possible maybe by the end of the season, especially with some of the attrition we've had at tackle, if none of these transfer steps up, he could be a backup tackle. Okay, don't get me wrong. But there was a play where, now again, in spring, it is easier for the offensive line because they're not expecting blitzes. So they can be a little bit more nonchalant in not expecting pressure and having to communicate better. But so there is a play where Carter K-Dow is playing left tackle and Mike Higgins is playing tight end on that side, on the strong side. And Eric O'Neill engage with Mike Higgins. Now, Mike Higgins had been pushed around by a couple other guys earlier in the day. Like there was a couple plays where there were stunts and everything, and he was really knocked off balance. Now, maybe he kind of got his foot under him and he had improved over the course of the game, but ball snapped and Mike Higgins picks up O'Neal. K-Dow doesn't even chip him. Maybe he had his arm out, but there was not like a chip get to the second level type thing. And Mike Higgins just blocked him one-on-one, right? Now, ultimately, I think the ball was out in less than 2.5 seconds, which wouldn't be fast enough for anyone to get the sack. So it's not like I would expect anyone in the history of Rutgers football, outside of maybe Kamoko Ture, to even be in the backfield in less than 2.5 seconds. But to me, this was my concern when I watched O'Neal's film before he joined the team, was that, hey, we watch some film, right? But his opponents watch a lot, over and over and over again. And the amount of times that I saw teams allow like a tight end to just block him. And then, yeah, he burned him several times for sacks, which is how he got to double digits. But the fact that teams, including Rutgers, watching their own player, that Carter K-Dow didn't feel the need, unless he was specifically coached not to help, which I doubt. But like maybe it was not like, that's my concern. Again, I'm with you. I think Eric O'Neal can be an effective player when used in pass rushing situations, not against the run, because he also did struggle. Like they ran a lot of plays at him in an option game where he had to either decide, like take the quarterback or take the running back, or at one point I think it might have been a guy in motion. And yeah, it's a really tough decision to be in if you're a defensive lineman, because they're basically leaving you unblocked. However, the really effective guys amazing guys can cover both, but we never had one of those, like maybe a Kasim Green. But everybody else, at least the effective guys will pick one and dictate terms to the offense. Like, I'm going to go for the quarterback, and then he's going to have to pitch it, which usually they will, right? But at least you're dictating terms for what the offense is going to do, not letting them just do whatever they want. And so I just think he'll improve with that. But my best hope is that they use him situationally, and he has the heart and the second effort that as other teams over the course of the season are winding down, I think if they can keep him fresh, he's going to be more effective. Mm-hmm. But if you try to like run him into the ground, like we saw this during the early Ash era when they spread in their starters too much, like I'm concerned. Now, do they have the depth to play a lot of other guys at edge? That's another issue. So I guess my follow-up to that is this team's biggest weakness right now the defensive end position?
Yes. I think fact. I think that, not only depth, but also high end on the edge, just in terms of guys that you can count on. Obviously, they don't have really anyone proven at this level to fit right in, and you're kind of hoping some guys work out. It might end up being, they might be fine there, but I think going into the season, in terms of like biggest question mark on that defense that has a lot of players to replace, for me, that the biggest question mark there is defensive end for the defense.
I'll agree. I actually was pleasantly surprised by how some of the defensive tackles played. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think they started out a little slow, but over the course of the game, I saw a little bit like Henry Hughes. I think is going to be able to be this year's Keshawn Griffin. So like Keshawn Griffin's been on the team for a couple of years. Last year, last 4 games, he showed something for basically the first time in a real game. And I feel like Henry Hughes is like 1 year behind him on that trajectory. I thought Blue Eli looked okay. I think they don't have one guy who's like dominant as a defensive tackle, and I will miss Keontae Hamilton, but I think defensive tackle might be okay with the amount of guys that they have. Whereas defensive end, like Bradley Weaver did not play in the spring game, if I recall correctly. Mm-hmm. So, but he's not a dynamic edge rusher either. Walker played, and I think he's improving. We saw him start to emerge, not Moses Walker, the defensive end, right? Jordan Walker.
Yes.
I think he looked okay. And what I saw from him, some of those mistakes are correctable, but really, we saw Jordan Thompson last year. He's limited, right? He might be able to help you in run support a little bit, but he's not going to develop a pass rush either. So I'm really concerned that in obvious passing rushing situations, they're going to have to blitz. And then one of the things that like they had, even when they had guys like Mike Teverdov, was that he could accelerate from run support to a pass rush if there was like a play action on 1st and 10. And I'm not sure who from this group is going to be that guy that can kind of flip in the middle of a play and just actually force the envelope. I just think opposing quarterbacks are going to have a lot of time back there unless Rutgers blitzes. And that's my biggest concern.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're going to have to be creative in their blitzes, and I think because simply they lack burstability on the edge there. I think it's that they're lacking speed where they've had it in the past. Even yes, Wesley Bailey was inconsistent with the injuries and all that, but is there a guy on the roster that can play the edge that has that kind of burst off the edge?
Right now, no.
So,
no.
All right, I got one for you. DJ McClary will either be in the linebacker rotation and or win a starting job.
Fact. To me, I know that DJ McClary was going against like second or third teamers, but he looked better than Moses Walker right away. Mm-hmm. And Moses Walker, we've all been waiting for him to kind of break out for a really long time now and like have a breakout like Jabomi had last year. And we've talked about this a lot. There's certain guys on the team who the staff likes, but eventually they're just going to kind of have to be like, we're going to have to go with the next guys. Like in their linebacker room, it was Jameer Wright-Collins, right? Elite athlete. Moved him from running back to linebacker, amazing high jumper, great special teamer. But they eventually got to the point where they're like, oh, we got to play Daryl Jabomi, right? Late 2 years ago. And then he didn't really emerge 2 years ago, but then last year he did. And Moses Walker got his feet wet and got plenty of playing time. But, man, I just think the only reason – here's the only way that'll be fiction is if Sam Robinson, and Johnson are MJ Johnson, who I think they changed his name on the roster. But if those two are in the 2 deep with Jabomi, okay, maybe McClary won't be in there. But – I mean, I saw enough from McClary to say, whoa, I think that especially if this team struggles to stop the run, he's going to be a guy who looks like he knows how to fill running lanes and deliver a pop, isn't afraid to tackle. And yeah, I mean, I would say fact or fiction by season's end, DJ McClary will be in the 2 deep, possibly even a starter. I'm going to say fact as well.
Well, you said it, and I agree with you. I asked you, you said it, and I agree. I thought he was really impressive. Linebacker, I think, has been a concern. Obviously, now with Motsare transferring out, to see McClary play the way he did and just the things we're hearing about him, I think, was super positive. And I think, for me, he just looked like a guy that he sees the field the right way. It's not too fast for him. His mind follows his body. Like he's reacting. He's not overthinking it. And he just seems to be in the flow. And I think he's going to be a key player for them this season.
Yeah, I mean, I guess on the linebacker, I would say I'm lifelong friends with Coach Harasimiak, but he's not a linebackers coach, and now you got 2. So even though Rob Smith and Zach Sparber are going to be your co-defensive coordinators, I do think that there's a possibility that we see a big jump from that group, even including Moses Walker. But I think it was already evident with Robinson Johnson how they were, let's say, last year versus now, just in probably having this additional attention and coaching. I mean, I think they all look pretty good. And that's why, again, I don't think Moses Walker looked bad, but I just think these other guys are improving at a rate that they're going to be demanding snaps.
Agreed.
All right, my turn to give you one, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. This defensive backfield will give up less big plays than they did last year.
That is a good one. I was just thinking before as you were talking about Jet Elad, obviously a lot of hype with him, reported really high NIL figure to get him. I think he has the ability to be really good for this team. They lost a lot in the secondary in terms of experience. I think we all grew to like a lot of the guys that were in the secondary. But you're right. They were a little bit prone to giving up some big plays. We saw how poor the tackling was at times last year. I think that the potential with this group is certainly there. Can you rephrase that one more time?
basically the defensive backfield will be responsible for less big plays allowed in 2025 than they were responsible for in 2024.
That is a very tough question because not only are you talking about the talent, but you're also have to figure in the schedule as well.
Right.
But, listen, Bo Masco, Cash Sanders, I mean, there's some real high potential guys there. I think I'm going to say fiction with the real possibility it could be fact. I think the group could end up being better as a whole than last year and in recent years past. But I think it's honestly with the step up in the schedule and kind of the inexperience of them playing together as a group, I'm going to start with fiction. But I do think it's possible that it could end up fact.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, I really like the guys who were in the defensive backfield for basically the last 2 or 3 whole years. It was a lot of the same faces back there. But the schedule is interesting because on one hand, they're probably going to play less games where they're facing like a UCLA or USC who thinks they just got to keep chucking it. But at the same time, I mean, Ohio State or Penn State, they might be able to getting more big plays in the run game, kind of like we saw in the bowl game where Rutgers had some inexperienced guys back there. I mean, I guess I would have to quantify it by saying like explosive plays of 20 yards or more, some actual metric for us to measure this. But I think there's going to be a lot of boomer bust.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say, just to be different than you, I'm going to say fact, but I think there might be some back-breaking breakdowns where a guy is just lost in coverage because of the communication or there's one missed tackle downfield. But overall, I think they're going to have more speed to like close down some of those runs that may break the first level, but they can work with the linebackers and prevent it from getting like 15, 20 yards downfield. Mm-hmm. But I think this might be the toughest one that I've asked. So I'm with you. It's like, to me, it's right on the line about where that is. I think they'll have more speed, but you can't just replace the experience of 4 like multi-year starters leaving the defensive backfield.
Right. I agree. All right, I'll ask another one. It's more of a big picture one. In terms of the spring game and what we know of the roster right now, with Greg Schiano entering his 6th season, is this fair to be where you would hoped he would be in terms of roster building at this stage of his second tenure? Or is it better or worse? You know what? It's fact or fiction. I will say, is this at the level where you expected the roster to be at this stage of his second tenure? Fact or fiction?
Yes, I'll say fact. This is where I expected it to be. That said, I would have expected them to have a little bit more talent at defensive end because they really did a good job with that during his first tenure. I mean, by the end, you had George Johnson, Westerman, you had Silvestro going to the NFL, John Freeney going to the NFL. Scott Vallone was more of a defensive tackle who's now on staff, but he was a great player for those who didn't know. But I felt like some of those positions I would have expected a little bit more. Or tight end as well. Like, I feel like they've had a track record that you'd think that when you run a run heavy offense where tight ends are being counted on in both the run and pass game, maybe you would have more. So I think in those areas, maybe it's a little more deficient, but everywhere else, I mean, they have rebuilt the defensive backfield to the point that they could be DBU again in the next couple of years. Maybe not right now, but it took him, his first tenure, if everyone remembers that Arizona State bowl game, that was year 5, right?
Yeah.
5. And They got shredded. So It wasn't until later that they were calling themselves DBU. So I think that's probably on par. Obviously, running back, receiver, like I would have been surprised if they were in a better spot, and especially a quarterback. Like, I thought we were going to be just looking for the Jabu Lovelace, Terry Showell, like types at quarterback. So to have Ethan Kaliakmanis and AJ Sarace both on the roster, it took him a long time to get to the Chase Dodd. I guess you could say Hart and Teal for that 1 year.
Well,
but
yeah.
It took him a long time to get to, a room of Chase Dodd and Tom Savage, who were both reliable, followed by Nova and Dodd, who were both, quality guys. So Overall, I would say yeah, but I mean, in some areas a little bit more, some areas maybe a little bit less. But I'll say fact. This is where I expect it to be, and that's a good thing. What about
Yeah,
you?
I agree with you. I actually think on the offensive side, you know, they're better than I thought they would be, just in terms of pure playmaking and talent right now. By the way, Teal and Hart, I mean, that was an amazing combination. I think it was that lull in between after Teal, and then obviously Savage and Dodd. He had a really good run with quarterbacks, not decision making in terms of how to play them sometimes, but in terms of quarterback talent, that first one was really high.
Right.
But I think I think offense has actually exceeded my expectations of where they would be at this point. Defensively, I think you're right. There's maybe some more questions than we thought. So I think right. It's fair to say fiction or fact in terms of being where we had hoped they would be. I think obviously schedule plays into this in terms of the overall outlook for next year. But the program has certainly gone in the right direction the last 2 years, and he has improved the roster significantly in his tenure so far. And with all that being challenged, right, with the change with the portal, with NIL. I think he's been very efficient in what he's done. I'm sure some people feel like it should be at a higher level than it's at, but I think all things considered, I think it's fact that they're kind of right where you would hope they would have been entering this year.
All right, let me give you one more. This coaching staff is defensive coaching staff is better equipped to play to their personnel in 2025 than they did in 2024. I.e., if they need to go Kansas State style defense, sending all kinds of blitzes and just daring teams to throw deep on them, if it comes to it, will they pull that ripcord, or will they be very stubborn and not and try to play the way they want to play rather than to the personnel they have during this transitional year?
Yeah, so I'm going to say fact that they are better positioned, and I think part of that plays into personnel, meaning that there's so many guys competing for playing time.
Yeah.
There's no set starters like there have been in the past. I mean, there's guys obviously that are favored to start now, but right, there's no one entrenched where last year we went into the year, we knew who 10 of the 11 starters were right off the bat.
Right.
This year, it's a lot more competition. There's a lot more, I think. Maybe there's not the top line players at certain positions, but I think there's more versatility actually in terms of where they could go for options. So I think the staff will have to be more creative. You also, just with Rob Smith, understanding concepts of what Shiana wants, but having Sparber with him, I think you made a great point before about them having a little bit more expertise on the linebacker position. We could see more growth there. We mentioned defensive line of concern, but I think that defensive back group could be really intriguing, and they could use them in really creative ways. And I think having kind of fresh eyes on the defense with a majority brand new personnel hopefully liberates them to be more creative, to be more risk taking, and hopefully with a better offense, you can do that with this type of defense. We all remember fondly Shiana's first era where he did take more chances. It was more predicated on mismatches and speed and, not just trying to, kind of toe the line and wear teams down with your physicality. And I think that we could see a little bit of a return to that for a lot of reasons that I stated.
Yeah, I'm going to say fact also because a lot of times, it's the same in the NFL. Like general managers will trade a player too early. Coaches might hold on to a player. I think it's not just players, but like the idea of certain players. And last year, that defense, it was just a little bit too long. Luckily, they had the bye week. They regrouped in typical Shiano coaching staff fashion. They were able to adjust and almost rattle off. I mean, they went 3-2 in the remaining 5 games, and both losses were 1-score games that were lost in the final possession. I mean, it could have been 5-0, right?
Yep.
And then the games they won, I mean, I guess Minnesota technically was a 1-possession game, but they were up 2 possessions, and then they kicked a field goal. Really, they had 2 multi-score wins. So I'm going to say yes. I'm confident that the coaching staff is more prepared for it if they need to go that route. Now, we all hope that we're wrong, that their defensive ends are better, that maybe the offensive line is so good that it made the defensive ends look bad, I guess. But I think they're ready to make that decision if it has to be made earlier in the year, because next year they got 2 games at the end of the schedule that they can't count on penciling in for a bowl
No.
qualifier. So they got to win 6 of their first 10. And so there's no time to be, not pulling the breaking glass, pulling the ripcord, whatever phrase you want to use.
Agreed. All right, let's wrap it up with this. Fact, and we'll both answer it. Fact or fiction? There's reasons to feel more confident about or more optimistic about this team following the spring, and in the regard to getting to 6 wins and making a bowl for another year this season versus how you felt going into spring. Fact or fiction?
Fact. Absolute fact. I would say, yeah, even though I made a couple, negative comments about certain things, certain parts of the team, overall, I feel like there's more depth in the linebacker. I feel like a lot of the defensive backs who were forced into duty last year, I think that they looked a lot better. I mean, I'll give an example. Sage Claugas, or Jesse O'Fury, if they have to play, I don't think that's going to completely nuke the season. Whereas going to the spring game, I didn't know about some of those positions. Same thing with offensive line. Whereas I think there's enough guys, even on the 2 deep on the line, that, let's say Felter doesn't come back from his injury as quickly as we thought. Or there's another, maybe Gus Zelinskis or Kobe Asamoah's banged up, could happen. I think there's enough depth there. And we didn't even talk about Dante Chin, who I don't even think played in the spring game, but he's not even penciled in as a starter, and he played games that they won. He started games they won down the stretch last year. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I feel better about it, because I think the things most likely to completely sink your season, quarterback injury, defensive back depth, and offensive line just being a sieve, those 3 areas I feel better about, which raises the floor of the team, which is why I have more confidence. What about you?
Yeah, totally agree. Great 3 points there. Facts for me. Also, I think just in terms of how Shiano defenses are successful, linebacker is so important to that. And I'm much more optimistic about the linebacker room than I was going into spring. I also think, we haven't even really, for obvious reasons, haven't really talked about a lot of the talent they brought in that did not play in the spring game, especially on the offensive side. We've talked about this in our last episode, but this is the most excited I've been about the offense in a long time. I think they have the highest ceiling they've had in a long time. It's funny how when you see the team play and you're feeling a little bit better about it, and then you go back and look at the schedule, and the schedule to me looks a little bit more manageable than it did 3 months ago after the season and looking at it. I mean, obviously, it's not easy. It's good. As you mentioned, they end the season at Ohio State and then Penn State at home. But, listen, they have Ohio, Miami, Ohio, Norfolk State, Iowa at home. Iowa, I think, is no sure thing to have, to be their normal 8-4, 9-3. They're replacing a lot of guys. Could Rutgers go 4-0? Could they head to Minnesota 4-0 and go and get it away? I mean, you never know. I think the middle of that season, I think the second half, obviously much harder. Why they scheduled Oregon for homecoming, I'll never understand. Obviously, the date is why, but still.
Right.
But yes, am I more optimistic this team can get to 6 wins? Absolutely. More so because of the roster. I think, defense, we talked about a lot of question marks, but linebacker and defensive back, a lot more optimistic about how that group can be. I am very concerned about the defensive line. Offensive line, I do think they have more depth. I still am concerned about the group as a whole, because I think, you also don't want to get into the situation where you're constantly shuffling guys and you're playing, 10, 11 guys to get 5. Where in years past, they kind of were pretty set on their 7, and we knew who those 2 backups were. So I think it does have the potential to have a lot more fluctuation there, which could be a bad thing. But I do think that they're trying to compensate depth as much as they can. But overall, yes, fact, I'm much more optimistic. Any more closing thoughts for you?
Just that it's nice to see a, for lack of a better term, professional operation in this football program, right? Not having to call timeouts right after a kickoff when you obviously should know exactly what play you're doing. Third string guys coming in, knowing what they're doing, knowing their assignments, right? Like, it just feels like it's a very well-run operation. And in the long run, that will win games. Not always on a year-to-year basis, but yeah, I mean, if the question is, are they on their trajectory to be what Iowa has been, or maybe Wisconsin was before they went to the dairy raid the last 2 years, even though they smacked Rutgers around, but as a program, I think they're on that trajectory, and that keeps it interesting for people when, I mean, I didn't even mention this. I was up at Rutgers for the baseball letter winners last weekend. My dad's 1981 I'm not sure if it was already called the Atlantic 10, but they were the conference champion, was being honored. So I was up there, met a bunch of guys from his team, other baseball winners, and basically a lot of them have had season tickets for a long time. And that's basically the feedback that I got from them, which is like, this is not the Chris Ash era, in paraphrase what they were saying, in terms of like, this is a well-run organization. They may not have the most beautiful stadium. They may not have the practice facility outside, like the indoor, Millennium Falcon, like Death Star type facility. But overall, this is a Big Ten level program, and that will put fannies in the seats and make it exciting for us over the next couple of years to watch, including this 2025 season with a brutal schedule.
Yeah, those are some great points. For me, just closing thought on the schedule, looking back on it, I really like that they played 2 MAC teams to start off the season. I think it's a good test. I think you will need to see this team they're going to have to be a little bit more cohesive. There's a lot of new players and new roles. And while the potential is there, they're going to have to work out the kinks a little bit. They don't have, they played Norfolk State third. But, those 2 games, listen, you can't take those for granted. You have to come to play. But I think they'll be challenging where it can improve this team. But I also think that, it'll allow this team to kind of come together before that Big Ten schedule in a way where they're not completely untested. But hopefully they're not worn down either. They're not playing a Power 4 team right off the bat, which, if you lose that, how momentum can go sometimes. Then you get upset, and then all of a sudden it's a crisis. So I think they can get through those 2 games. They can learn more about themselves. You go into Norfolk State, and then you have Iowa at home. They could be gelling to the point where they can make an impact right off the bat. And to your first point before, they have to hit the ground running in Big Ten play. It can't, they can't start 0-3 in Big Ten and expect to make a bowl game. So right. I think those first 2 weeks are going to be critical to the success of the team overall. And I think from what we saw from the talent level, from the versatility level, from the depth level, I'm certainly more optimistic as you are. And hopefully the fans and people listening to this feel so as well. David Anderson, always a pleasure. This was a lot of fun. I hope it came out well. No idea. But thank you for listening once again, and we'll be back soon enough to talk more Rutgers football. Thanks so much for listening here at the Scarlet Faithful podcast.
Thanks.